Okay, so I just want to say thank you so much to my friends and colleagues, incredible author Jeff Chang, Mr. Davey D, an old friend, amazing activist, great radio programmer and writer also, both of which have joined us today on the call to talk about this amazing new project that they're working on, which is like, I don't know, Jeff, I kind of feel like people should hear a little bit about like how the first iteration of the book came to be so they can understand, they can understand why there's a revision, honestly.
Sure. First off, thank you so much, Jess, for the kind invitation, and huge shout out to all y'all. I got my start to actually, even in my writing, my hip hop journalism career, starting out actually as a DJ at Calex, following like a puppy dog in my elder brother Davey D's footsteps, trying to follow him all around and that kind of thing, and was at KDVS, and then I moved to LA and worked for a little while at the Beat 92.3 with Mike Nardone's late night show, The Joint, and King M's, and sub for him a lot over there too. So that's actually how this whole thing got started way back in the day. And we put out this book. I put out this. I wrote this book, Can't Stop, Won't Stop: A History of the Hip Hop Generation. Came out in 2005, and it had a life of its own. It kind of took off, and it was really all of the stuff that I had learned um, in hip hop, and sort of a perspective on hip hop, looking at it in the social context as a way of kind of understanding the history of the U.S. through hip hop.
Right.
Seemed like a crazy idea at the time, but now, of course, it makes all the sense in the world to everybody, because folks like us have been, you know, putting it in folks' faces, and now like we're running, the underground, we're running the world, we're running all the things. So it makes sense now, but it didn't at the time to a lot of people, and it survived. And so my editor came back to me a few years ago and said we should do this for a new generation. And first, like, I was floored, because the fact that the book's lived this long has been pretty amazing and humbling. And the second thing I thought was, man, I gotta call my man Davey, because I'd always wanted to do this thing with him. So that's how we got to doing this. And the book, was just to wrap up here. I know I'm going on, but the book was supposed to come out like last year, and of course, all kinds of things started happening. The pandemic, and then of course, the uprisings happened, and we were like, no, we've got to be able to put this together, put it all in there, because the book starts really with the sort of decline of the Black Power movement and how hip hop starts with that. And so
Right.
it made sense for us to end it with the rise of Black Lives Matter and the role that hip hop's played in that. So that's the arc of the book. It starts in '68, goes up to 2020, and we're making it available for people like Dave's kids, and my kids are a little too old now, but my nephews and nieces, and I'm just super happy to be able to be here with you all.
Yeah, I mean, I've mentioned this on the call before, but like this is like the original version of this book is something that I feel like every person I know has on their bookshelf. Dave, why do you think that this story told like this resonates in the way that it did from the beginning?
Well, there were two things about Jeff's initial approach. Up to that time, you were dealing with it was almost like a formula. Hip hop started in the Bronx. You talk about Bambaataa, Flash, and Herc. You hear the cliches that it stopped gang violence. The South Bronx was burning. And then, then you go into, the early days of dancing and some of the early movies. And then we just kind of go on. And the question was, well, how exactly did the gangs impact this culture? What was going on? And, Jeff changed that paradigm by looking at, some things that if you grew up in the Bronx like I did, we knew about, but he was able to crystallize that and capture it. Um, and keep in mind, when I was coming up, I'm a kid, so I don't. There's no way to even really comprehend the full magnitude of it. It was like, there's a big park across the street from the house, because I lived right across the street from Bronxdale housing projects and then later Soundview. And that's where the black spades were. And you remember little things like the spades walking across, um, the freeway, the 95, and going to other housing projects and smashing on people, or stopping like the racist Italian cats that lived in the neighborhood from coming into ours. Those are things like you remember this, but there's no context. But then when you read this book, and what Jeff unearthed was, this whole structure that first of all opened up the Bronx, the peace treaty, which you get a glimpse of it maybe in Warriors, but to understand that there was a certain amount of agency from a group of people who had been written off and were basically abandoned is a story unto itself. And to follow that narrative and look at it from the lens of social political power structure and the resistance to it, I think made it much more attractive. It makes you understand why hip hop is what it is. And there's a million stories that come under that rubric versus the simple one, which was like, the Bronx was burning and they stopped gangs and you move on. And so I think that's what resonated with folks. And then Jeff did his homework,
Yeah.
in terms of, it took him like 10 years to write the book, it took a long time. So, the work was put in there, and it showed up, and coming into this thing, there were obviously um, gaps, that people would like to criticize. Oh, you didn't mention Biggie, and you didn't have this one, all these things which are going to be impossible and to do when you do a book, and all these things that people are going to look at this book and they're going to find something like, oh, you didn't mention my cousin. Yeah, you're right, we did, and that's going to be on you to do that. But with that being said, um, we were able to fill those gaps and kind of reflect it to, I think, some powerful narratives that are important now. So in the book, you're going to see not just a chapter on women, but a very intentional integration of the stories where women are constantly present, because why, women were there from day one, from the very get-go. And not just as side pieces, but, essential contributors and influencers that, I think we're now ready to hear. And because maybe about even 15 years ago, we were still having arguments with people who were, boldly saying, these are people at labels. Nobody wants to hear women. Or as I've heard people say, they can't tell the difference between MC Light and Missy. I've heard this from a label executive, right? um, that was on their label. Uh, we've had how many Coachella type shows, where you have like massive lineups and only Lauryn Hill might be on there. So, including that, um, including women was going to be essential. The other thing that we are now at a moment where people want to know the local histories.
Yeah.
Okay, we heard about the Bronx, but what about the Bay? And what about Atlanta? And what about all these places? You can't do all those are deserving of books on their own, but at least I think the intention was to pass a baton and acknowledge, like, there are these deep histories that go back in some cases even further than that landmark party that Kool Herc did. So yeah, 73 is the jump off for hip hop, but there's a dance culture in LA and the Bay. There's a culture down south, there's a culture in other, in Detroit. And so even if we don't dig super duper deep into it, because again, it's still for younger people, it still lets them know, like, hey, there's some things for you to explore. Like you heard this one jazz record with this break. Now you know the author. Go look at the other breaks that may come out of that particular artist.
Yeah.
And so, and then lastly, taking it all the way up with George Floyd and George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and the pandemic was something that we could not ignore. It would have been a crime if we did, because and I'll close with this. This history is what we've read about in books. We were required to read about things that were on this magnitude as a way to get um, credits to graduate from college or high school. And coming from, Black perspective, at least, what I found is these landmark moments are oftentimes we're written out of it. Like ask people what the Black perspective was in 9/11, and people are hard pressed. Most people don't even remember the stance that Barbara Lee took, and that was historic, much less what hip hop did around 9/11. And there's a whole lot of history around that. All these crews that came together to help the firefighters, like Naughty by Nature, the dances and parties they did at Roseland, and the graph artists and the mural. All that's been erased, and so this moment we wanted to capture that and remind people that the millions of people that came out were, hip hop had a role in that. Or during the pandemic, look at the role that DJs played, D Nice and Swiss Beats and Timberland and all these other, folks. The meeting that you have here is hip hop at the end of the day. You did this in the middle of the pandemic, and those are things that needed to be captured and remembered. So when we look 10, 15 years from now and people go, nah, this never happened, go, God damn it, we got some receipts. It's in this book, had to be fact checked because we spent hours with them damn lawyers and they wanted to know everything. Where'd you get this quote from? Who's Jessica? How do you know her? Did she really say that? Do you have a tape? Like, really? It's like, she's my homegirl. Well, can we call her? That's what it was like, to make sure everything
Yeah.
that was put in there was factual. So, but it's a testament for us to have as a special moment
Yeah.
in time for the most recent event, and a keepsake for the things that preceded it.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I was going to mention, and you touched on this a lot, Davey, is that, like, Jeff, when the first version of the book came out, the music already meant so much to people. Like, people were so into this music, this movement. And, like, I think there was an element of being able to read about it and understand more about it that made it mean even more, like just having the timeline laid out, understanding all the different nuances, like Davey's talking about now with the update, but just in the beginning, I think it really struck people, and it made people understand just how important the music was. And I want to, like, I'm curious if you realize, I mean, I'm sure to some extent you realize you're doing that, but like, just for the folks on the call, Jeff has written a couple books, but I feel like those happened maybe later on, right? Like in 2014, and they were dealing with more race and culture and those kind of things. But when you wrote this first book, there was a lot of that. Not, well, maybe it was intentional, I don't know, but like the storytelling, how important is the context? Like, because everybody here is on the call is in radio. We're all storytellers. This is what we do, right? So what should they be pulling out of this new version that's gonna, like, are there things, what are the things we can look for that are in this new book that are stories that need to be told?
Well, the book is probably about, I'd say 35, 40%, stuff that was in the first book. Of course, we're writing it for a younger audience. Um, so that, we don't use as many, like, whatever, $25 words and that
Yeah.
kind of stuff.
Right.
Um, but the new parts of it, we actually got to really go deep with who we are. So, Dave's experience in the Bronx is all through this book. He gets to wax poetic about Sharrock, for instance, which is like one of my favorite parts of the book, to be completely honest. And we get to talk about Shantae and all these folks. But the other thing that we get to do is we get to bring the story all the way up to now, and just talk about the real importance of, like, hip hop radio, of underground radio, college radio, right? The whole networks, and how it lifted hip hop from being this sort of underground movement to being like this global culture. And we get to really go deep with a lot of places and spaces. We go deep on Atlanta, on Philadelphia, on a bunch of different places. We go deep on South Korea. You know what I mean? Like it's a lot of fun. Detroit, you know, like we get to shout out all these different types of places and tell those types of stories. Because hip hop is a story machine, right? Like we're like you say, we're all storytellers. We're all in this, and we are the folks who are keeping the memory of what's going on in different types of places, whether it be like we've got to memorialize, you know, the actions of what people did in 2020, um, you know, all the way through to going back, right, to like, oh man, you know, like let's bring this person on or that person on who represents the dance culture, which never gets
Mm,
talked about otherwise,
yeah.
or you know, the graffiti culture or that kind of thing. So it was just fun. It's just a lot of fun to be able to think about what are the stories that we want to be able to make sure that we're passing on to you know, our peers and our colleagues, but more importantly to like the next generations, you know,
Um,
thinking about like Dave's kids, for instance. So
yeah.
yeah.
I wanna make sure we can take questions and stuff, but one thing I did want to ask you guys about is, were there musical moments that you felt like tied into the times that you guys were researching 2015, like Ferguson, for example, or what's happening now, what happened this last summer, like I'm curious if there were things which popped up which you felt like were symbolic musically, which tied to these, like, which tied to the New Year's that you guys were covering.
For me personally, no.
Hmm.
And you know, part of the challenge we have is hip hop has been hijacked by big business. And in that hijacking, what it's become has become a fast food commodity, in today, out tomorrow. And I think we were talking to somebody last night on a call, and it was reminding them that, you know, when I teach in my classes, I write on the board, name the top 10 artists from 2020, and they'll be able to give you 10. And we'll go 2019. And I'm having, you know, people have seen me do it. I have like 150 students. By the time we get to 7, people are hard pressed to remember. And it's the hip hop class, right? So they're there. We go 2018, it usually stops around 4. By the time we go back 4 years, you might get 1 or 2. And these are people that are born after 2011, you know, 9/11. Now we go to them. Y'all ever heard of Tupac's All Eyes on Me, or Wu Tang's 36 Chambers, or, you know, Biggie's Ready to Die? People raise their hand. Name 4 songs off of 36 Chambers. You get a class that can do that, but can't remember what the hell was happening a year ago. And that's not their fault. That's by design. We've done this with industry folks at conferences where they could not really process the very product that they've been hoisting on us. And so what that means is that the music doesn't take as much weight as it did before. Part of it is because those were the only voices that many of us had. Our lives were crystallized through Wu Tang. It was crystallized through, you know, Nas. You know, he captured New York for us in ways that, you know, we didn't have a narrative or space to share a narrative. Um, you know, Public Enemy meant something to us. Today, people feel like I can go on social media and I can actually be bigger than my own hip hop, my favorite hip hop artist. So there's a lot of that goes on. And with this access has become a lot of misinformation, a lot of dismissal of important things, a lot of hot takes for the sake of hot taking versus really digging deep. And so we wanted to not get into that sort of battle, but to make sure that people have something that's going to be solid and that's going to be here, that will stand the test of time. So when some of these trends pass, when we go from Facebook to IG to TikTok to whatever next iteration, and we go, you know, I want something a little bit more rich, this book will be here with, you know, solid truth and solid stories of people that I think, and I think Jeff thinks, you know, really impacted a lot of things that we may just be overlooking in these moments. So that's part of the landscape that we're dealing with. You know, we're going to be the home cooked meal in a fast food environment.
Right. Jeff, what about you? What do you think? Any maybe if it's not a musical moment, any like moments that stood out?
We
Any
just
any surprises that you guys discovered in kind of putting this stuff together?
lots of surprises, actually, lots and lots of surprises. But I think, one of the things that, well, I don't want to give the ending away because I want y'all to read the book, actually. And if you don't have time to read, Dave and I, actually, let me put a plug in here because Dave and I did an audiobook of it, and that was hella fun. We split the book, and he does half, and I do half. So you get to hang out with us and hear our voices in your ear on that. But that was kind of fun. And there was actually a lot of outtakes on that. We can talk about the outtakes. Um, the outtake reel for that. Um, but for us, the ending part of the book, the last chapter is about BLM, and the moment, and there is a moment where music actually plays a significant role, and it's an organic moment. It's this moment that just happens, like in the context of a Black Lives Matter conference in Ohio and Cleveland, and there's sort of a street battle that occurs between the the organizers and the activists, and the police there, and people start singing and chanting, and they literally chant down Babylon in this, and it's just an amazing kind of moment. So I think about that, and I just I get chicken skin, like we say in Hawaii. um, so I still think that this is something, music brings us together, gathering around the radio or gathering around your Bluetooth speaker and that kind of stuff. Like my kids still do it every weekend. They get together with their cousins and they play music for each other. So there's a collective vibe that never will go away. And that's part of the thing that we're trying to emphasize in the book is the collective power of our communities,
Mm-hmm.
because hip hop represents, our voices, and we emphasize that over and over and over again. Not to put too fine a point on it, but it's the kind of thing that you want to make young folks be able to understand this kind of thing from a very young age, right? That it's not just about like getting up and doing your dope ass TikTok dance, but like the joy that comes out of it is actually resistance in a way. It's actually transformational in a lot of ways. We want to make them understand that they can use this to make their world a better place. So that's part of the spirit that we approach the book with.
Yeah. Resistance,
What
continuous resistance.
does anybody want to either put a question in the chat or ask a question? I don't want to take up all the question time with my own questions, but
Oh, yeah.
Well, thank you, Kelly.
Thank you, Kevin, for sure.
what is the age range for the book? That
Yeah, I mean, uh, Dave, how is Akira and Soluna?
Well, my kids are 10 and 8, and just having teaching college, this book is for them. You know, it has them in mind, but it's young adults, and I think, it's not a simple book. If that's what you're thinking, it's not like Jack went to the store and then Johnny came out. No, this is a book, you know. Um,
Yeah.
the only caveat I would say that maybe somebody who is like really, really deep into the culture might say, "Oh, I know this," but I think most people will be like, "I don't know this," because there's a lot of things that we cover. Um, One advantage is that Jeff and myself had been at places, and this time we were able, I was able to contribute, like being at the meeting in Chicago that ended the East-West Coast War that we covered, and that's something that there's a finite number of people that were there, and there were kind of stipulations on that meeting, like there were certain things we could talk about and couldn't talk about, and I had permission to talk about some of the things we talked about there, you know. So that's important that we got to include that, we both were in Ferguson. He got arrested in Ferguson,
Yeah.
so we got to be up close and personal with some of that. Um, a lot of things we were involved in, a lot of these artists we know, so we get to share some of that. And through those artist stories, we try to connect them to larger pieces of the puzzle,
Mhm.
with the social and economic and political bent. I think one of the things that hip hop is faced with is an attempt to remove it from that. People like, I just want to hear the music. And we're unapologetic is more than just the music and the artists that we know, from the Cardi B's on down to the Rhapsodies to you name it. They're like, nah, there's a politic, even if they don't think it's a politic, it's a politic. You
Mm.
know, to not have a politic is political. So we talk about the moments and you know, whether it's Cardi B sitting down with Bernie Sanders or Tef Poe, you know, talking about his take on Ferguson and where he's at, and you know, and it just goes on from there. The music is an integral part of it. It's a backdrop, but you know, we ask people to kind of look at it as expression, you know, more
Mhm.
than just music. And if you really break it off, and of course, we couldn't really put this all in the book, but the spirit and our understanding is that music has a function in many of our societies. You know, just because you can sing doesn't mean all of us just got to sit back and listen. Hip hop is like, oh, if you busting a rhyme, if I busted a rhyme right now, there's somebody on this call that's going to be like, yo, as soon as he takes a breath, I'm jumping in and the cipher's on, because you ain't the only one that gets to rhyme. You ain't the only one with a story to tell. If I start busting moves on the dance floor, somebody's going to be like, okay, now, you know, I'm gonna get in this circle too. And that's the beauty of hip hop. It's a global cipher. It's a generational cipher on DJing, playing the music, dancing, and you know, these oral traditions, you know, that right now we celebrate around rap, but it's all sorts of vocalization that is now umbrellaed under hip hop. Is really, speaking, speaking truth to power, speak it into existence, Nomo, which is West African saying and understanding the power of words.
Yeah. I would like just kind of thinking on that, and I'm just like spitballing here, but just like the importance of, I mean, you guys, whatever, having a lot more experience writing in the activism world, a lot, I feel like are in this group, especially, we've been talking a lot, all of us trying to figure, like, find our way and figure out like how to kind of be those storytellers and share those stories and
Mhm.
keep the conversation around what's going on out there going. Um, and I know it can feel kind of like not small, but I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but like I mean, as far as like being a messenger for this kind of, for the work that you guys are doing, and also just like, you know, continuing to kind of carry on the conversation. Any helpful hints for our crew as we're feeling it out in all of our respective cities and markets and whatnot?
I would say, and I said this before on the calls, every one of us have a platform right now, an important platform. And if we're on radio, that's an even more important, that's a even more that's a platform that we have even more responsibility, because it's an institution that's been around for almost 100 years or more. And I think we owe it to our communities to be griots, you know, for them to be the keepers of culture, to be the keepers of history, to be accessible so others can um, have an opportunity to share their expressions with the world. Don't be selfish gatekeepers, but be inclusive, you know, gatekeepers. And I wouldn't even say gatekeepers, but be facilitators of conversations that are going on in the community. You know, what does that look like? Be curators of those conversations, and do it with the intention of having it stand the test of time. Um, that is resistance in many ways, because we're in a moment where everybody's trying to make us consumers. You know, we just got our iPhone 12 and they're getting ready to come out with iPhone 13. And, you know, and you're wondering, like, what the hell what's wrong with my iPhone 8 or 9, compared to the other four that we were told that we needed to buy. There's a new sneaker, a new fashion thing that we're all told that we need to get into. And I don't think we have a time to just kind of let some things bake and really figure it out. If I use the iPhone metaphor, most of us can't tell you all the different things that your iPhone can do. You know, we're on to iPhone 12 and we didn't even know all the things that 11 could do. We don't know all the things that the 12 can do, and probably won't know all the things that the 13 will do before they're hoisting something else on us. And I think we don't want to treat this culture the same way. You know, if you're in Minneapolis, there's rich history that goes deep, and we want to know every nook and corner, from the rhyme sayers to, to Prince's connection to hip hop, and the work he did with Chuck D and the album that he did with Dougie Fresh that never got released, right? We want to know all those things, because within finding these stories, we're going to find a part of ourselves. And that's important as well. Society doesn't want us to connect to community and doesn't want us to really be fully connected with ourselves. And I think that's hip hop did that in the beginning, and it can do that now. And we want to hopefully encourage people to dive in deep that way.
I got a quick question. I got to hop on here because this is fantastic. I really appreciate you both being here and sharing this perspective. What you said about the Black Lick, by the way, I MC, radio, DJ, all sorts of different things. But right. I'm a griot, just like you're saying, bro. In my streets, I'm all about connecting stories. And I teach a hip hop creative writing class in private schools and middle school students. I'm doing that for about 8 or 9 years. And I was curious about what you said about the college class and how people can't remember, as well as people in the industry as well. And I was wondering if you feel like the goal of the overwhelming access that comes from global and mass consumerism, it has an undertone goal of dissolving the meaningfulness of music by creating a mentality of high-paced consumerism or consumption versus, as you said, the bake approach.
Yeah, I feel that way. When I did this, the first time I did this in the industry, I want to say it was at Urban Network, and it was Kevin Black from Interscope. It was Luke Skywalker on the panel. I think Tech might have been on there. A bunch of people. It was a whole bunch of industry people, and these are the folks that put out the music, and they could not remember shit from like 3 or 4 years down the road, right? And you put it out, and I remember asking the question, what album is Stan on, Eminem's thing, and was it on the first or second album? And, and it was like, oh, it was on the first album, and, and they got it all wrong, and so the point that we were getting at is that we all have to take time with this and understand that the music has a function, and that function is to build community at the end of the day. And I think when we build community like this gathering that we have, that's problematic for people that's in power. We just heard, oh, they're doing voter suppression in Georgia. Oh, they're getting ready to do that here. Now we can get on the air and amplify that and move that in another direction. Somebody who wants to keep people in power, it's like, we need to break this up. We need to divide and conquer this. And so, they're very strategic and methodic about it. And they start with young people. They start with my kids, 8 and 10. Why are they on TikTok? Why they're being exposed to things, and we have to intervene continuously and say, this is good. Let's redirect you. Oh, you saw Dogman do the skateboard? That was the Fleetwood Mac album. Let me give you the story behind that Fleetwood Mac album, because it's a doozy of a story. Let me tell you that Fleetwood Mac was the biggest group before Michael Jackson came along. There's rich history in it, and some of those songs were actually played at block parties, if you want to know, if you really want to get down to it. So now, the 10-year-old knows about Fleetwood Mac above and beyond a guy on a skateboard with a cranberry juice that he's drinking. He knows, like, yo, these were some fucking musicians that could kick the ass, and were kicking ass at the time. And so those are important, connections. And I'll close by saying, when we were coming up, we had no choice. At least I couldn't. I'm old enough to remember. I had to sit in the back of the car and had to listen to, my mom and pop say, this is Earth, Wind, and Fire. This is Reasons, and hear my pops try and sing the damn song, and, be like, this is love songs. And, and you had to, you couldn't turn the radio on and couldn't put no headphones on. You had to listen to all that. That's Stevie Wonder. Do you know Stevie? Stevie's the baddest man, but he wasn't as good as Ray Charles. All that stuff becomes important years later because it reminds us who our heritage is. And folks don't want to have our heritages, intact. They want it fragmented so they can reprogram us. And we can't have that happen. Not on our watch. We've seen too much damage when that happens. So.
And I did want to follow and say, so do you feel that that with the advent of a lot of people who came up in the era that you're speaking of, and about the two eras that followed it, a lot of them, have disconnected from hip hop? Like, as far as what's coming, they've disconnected from hip hop. And do you think that it's a problem that contributes to the disconnection between the youth and what they're seeing and their access versus the absence of choice that you have experienced?
The question I would ask is, in what ways do you feel that they disconnected?
Oh, I mean, I would say my audience, I have to come up with slick ways to slide in new stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like new music by new artists, current contemporary things they want to listen to. They still want to stay in that 90s, that golden era type thing. And they don't want to hear, they don't want to hear what Cardi has to say. They don't want to hear what Kodak has to say. They've moved forward. And one of my greatest concerns often when looking at the spectrum is that in trying to reach the youth, we abandon the older people, the previous generations. And the connection often for them feels like they're having to dumb themselves down. And for young people, the connection feels like condescension.
Right.
And do you consider that to be something that is going to be just something we have to accept, or is there a way?
Well, that's
your
not
book is a great way to connect that. By the way,
thank you. That's not limited to hip hop. That's going on right now.
Mm-hmm.
That's across society, in every aspect. What I often tell, my students, I say institutions have memories. They will remember everything that you did. Try and go to the bank tomorrow and say, I need a loan. And they'll go, Black, 1995, you didn't pay your Sears bill. So your credit rating is now 614 instead of 700. And you're like, that's 30 years ago. Yeah. And they passed that loan for $100 to a bunch of different companies that impacted your credit. So they remember. The question is, do you remember, the institutions that were put in place, or even the laws that were put in place that allowed them to have such a control over your life over one minuscule, misstep? And so I tell them, if you don't have a connection to your past, you will be doomed to recreate that wheel again. And we don't need wheel creators. We need people to build off of the good things that happened before. And so it's important not to just know history for history's sake. And we try not to do that in the book where it's a bunch of dates, times, and places, but to understand the essence of what's going on. Like if we're telling you about Cardi B sitting with Bernie Sanders, it's not to do it as a hot take. It's to go, she had 48 million followers. That was twice as much as all the Democratic candidates combined. But this is what she said in that meeting. She was talking about, I'm rich, I got it made, but my people need loan forgiveness. My people need rent forgiveness. My people need these things. So she was advocating, right? And we want you to remember that she advocated, even as we're debating the merits of her, her songs,
Yeah.
It's important, that we bring forth that aspect of the story, and not, her and Megan, did an adult themed dance. We all know adult themed scenarios. We all like them, and I put it in that context, not for my 10-year-old to look at, it's for me, if my wife allows it.
As the only person with good credit in my family, I truly appreciate what you just said.
There you go.
We're coming up on 3, so I'm gonna, Jeff. We have one question in the chat. I'm gonna throw it to you. What was your favorite moment writing the book, this new version of the book, before we all dip?
I mean, really, just getting the chance to be able to work with Dave. Obviously, as you can tell, he has a lot of stories, and being able to actually make that happen was just a lot of fun. Also difficult sometimes. I got to be real. But you know, working with my older brother has been a lot of fun. It's a joy. We were able to kind of like, you know, we've had this friendship and this relationship that's gone back many many years, and for us to be able to kind of take that out now and share that with the world, and to be able to put out these types of ideas, is an amazing thing. So props to my partner here in crime.
Yeah, let me say something with Jeff. What he did, he accentuated what hip hop is. Right, he kicked down the doors and brought other people in. He did that before with other books. I'm sure a lot of them he could have written himself, but he was like, I got these writer friends, let me bring them in. Right, and he gave us all opportunity to shine. He brought me in. The story is I actually had a book before his, but my book got stolen. Literally, like somebody broke
Really?
into my car, stole my car, and everything was gone. Um, and so, by the time his came out, it was like, well, we can't follow this with that, But Jeff was like, I see it, I understand, and I know what you're about. I'm gonna make sure, that the ladder is tossed behind. And when you think about our ascension into this, ladders were tossed from us. Chuck D definitely tossed those ladders down. There's an array of people, but Chuck stands out as somebody's like, I'm putting you on the back of my album. It's going to get you some shine. Give your A game. And I think that's what we bring is the A game. Having Jeff be the person that brought me in, we're sitting in meetings and it's like, oh, he already knows these ropes. He already knows how this goes down. When we're writing, he already knows how to put these things together and you can learn. It's like, damn, how you take 40 pages, you asked for two, I gave you 40, and you condensed it and made the shit sound right. That's not an easy thing to do. He might have been annoyed like this
Yeah.
dude gave 40 pages. I only asked for two. You know, but it represents what hip hop is supposed to be about, which is each one teach one. And when each one teach one is not a age thing, but it's more like a skill set, so we can learn from our younger folks and we can learn from our older folks. And, to your thing, Black, one of the things that I remind my peers when they're like, I don't like all this new stuff. So you better sit down and learn from it because they speak in a different language and they have a different rhythm. At least become fluid in their language. You don't have to speak it, but at least understand where they're coming from because there's a reason why drill shows up. There's a reason why hyphy showed up. There's a reason why crunk showed up. It might not be your thing, but hip hop wasn't my parents' thing. So we're our parents' ages now. So, listen to them and figure it out and and break bread and have community with them is what I tell my peers when they start getting on this. Like, I don't understand. You're not supposed to understand. You're 40 and they're 18. But you can learn.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much for dialing in and to talk to us today. And, if anybody has questions for Davey or Jeff, you can always reach out to us. You can leave a message in the chat. I have a bunch of great assets about the book, for the book, if anybody needs them for broadcast programming, whatever. And hopefully you guys will be able to come back again and give us a little update. Oh, and
We got the big Twitch party.
Yep, we'll send the info on the Twitch party, and the guys are going to be talking to Cool Herc at the end of April, and that'll be a more streamlined conversation about New York hip hop history, but should be really good. I'll send you guys all the info on that, obviously, as well. Otherwise, don't forget to check out your breakout groups and make sure you know when they're meeting. And check in if you have extra time to help everybody kind of chip away. Jeff Chang, any final thoughts? Any last bits?
Yeah, no, just say thank you so much, and we'll have an interview actually that we did with Adam Mansbach, Dave and I yesterday, that we'll get to you to get to folks if they want to use it,
Cool.
if you want to use it on your shows. And thank you, Jeff, and Misha for the ask about the audiobook. We'll talk to our folks this week and see how much we can make available to you all to be able to play as well, especially if you're going to be using it for your youth classes and that kind of thing too. So
yeah, thank you.
just let Jessica know, and we'll make sure that we make that happen for y'all. And just thank you all for all you do, because you're doing it. You're really doing it.
Thank you guys. And we'll see you guys next week at 2.
All right, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.